Think it's good? Cool. Thanks for your help. And let me know at any time if you can't hear something or if it's too loud, because I definitely don't want either of those things to be true. I'm going to start kind of where I left off yesterday. And if you weren't around yesterday, that's not a problem because it's archived on my YouTube, part 1 of this. But we talked about basically my method of learning harmony through the piano keyboard, and I stay in the key center of C the whole time to really get a deeper, get it in my ear, as they would say. So here is where we're going to pick up from yesterday. We talked about scales, the major scale. We talked about intervals, and we talked about chords. 2-note chords and 3-note chords. 4-note chords. And we touched a bit on modes, like we discussed the Dorian Mode. And that's achieved by playing a D in the bass and then playing notes from the C major scale over that D in the bass. So we call that the Dorian Mode. That font is horrible, but I'm not going to waste any time trying to figure that out. This is the first time I'm using this whiteboard thing, but it'll be cool for notes, I guess. All right, so that's if you play the notes from C major, the C major diatonic scale over D, you get the Dorian sound. So there's a mode for each degree of the scale. So let's scoot up to the F, the mode that comes off of the 4th note of the C major scale. 4th note is F. So if we were to play F in the bass, and then notes from the C major scale. Is it always about the bass note? Right. Yeah, that's a great question about the bass note. So the bass note is what establishes a key center feeling. Okay, that's going to be your new home, resolution, the tonic, the root of your sound. But by using the C major scale over that, you're going to get a particular new scale based on F as the bass note. So yeah, that is the basis of modal playing, of understanding modal playing there. You got it. So I really like this mode. I love this mode. It's called Lydian Mode. Program. Anyway, it's called Lydian Mode. And it doesn't really matter what it's called, but it's a helpful reference. Because when you want that sound, and we're going to talk about why it's got this dreamy quality to it. It's basically a major scale. Except that this would be the F major scale. It would have a B flat. That's Do, Re, Mi starting on F. But when we're using the notes from the C major scale, it's got a sharp 4th. So we don't play the natural fourth in the F major scale. Instead, with the tools we're using here, we use a sharp 4. And that sharp 4 and the major 7 here, which is like the note below F, have a very mysterious quality about them when played in this context. So those two notes are the ones that are giving it its extra spice. So that's F Lydian. Okay. If we want to take our C major scale and alter that to become C Lydian, now that we understand the formula, let's go back to the C scale. And from what we could extrapolate from the F Lydian scale, by putting that rule on the C scale here, we get C, D, E, F sharp, sharp 4. And so this is now C Lydian. C Lydian is that scale. And so if I improvise over C in the bass, once I've established the sound of C Lydian, I can move the bass note. It doesn't have to just sit there being a C pedal the whole time. So we're feeling the C as the root here, and we're feeling this sharp 4 and the mysterious sound it imparts. And so now we can go up the scale and create a progression of sticking to this scale. So that's all still C Lydian business, but I'm moving through the same scale in my left hand for the bass. I'm still really committing to that. That's home. So even as I use some other notes from the scale, you know, with the same, like that's an interesting one. I'll just kind of go back and forth between C and the bass, and then go up to the third, which is E in the bass. And in my right hand, I'm just doing C Lydian stuff, whatever comes to mind. So within each mode are a bunch of built-in progressions and interchanges between chords inside of the mode. But this is all still in the bag of C major diatonic scale study. So we're still in do, re, mi as the basis from which we'll alter a note, just one, and then use that everywhere. But it's a sharp 4 because we're speaking relative to C major. So that's the sharp 4 in C major. So that's why it's a mode of C, and it is helpful to think of it sometimes as a version of C. Something interesting to talk about, though, is why does it sound, mysterious? And I agree that it does. And the sharp 4 is what we talked about yesterday, the tritone. That is the same note, believe it or not, as a flat 5th. So when we're talking about going down a half step, we talk about flattening the note. So if I have a G and I want to alter it to this F sharp, I flatten it 1/2 step. But if I have an F note and I want to alter it to F sharp, I sharpen the note. So sharp is up, flat is down. And as you can see, because of the way at least the piano keyboard is laid out, it's easy to see how these letter notes of C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C are, both above and below these 5 notes, which make up the flats and sharps. These are the notes between the letter notes here. So, for instance, C sharp, D. Now, C sharp is also D flat. So, 2 names for the same note. And that can get confusing when you're talking about... Let me take a couple notes here. Okay, those are called enharmonic spellings for the same sound. Your ear hears the same sound. Hey, what's up, buddy? Good morning. And there are 2 names for it. And there's reasons for that. Sometimes it belongs to this scale, sometimes it belongs to that scale. Sometimes it's a C sharp, sometimes it's a D flat. But we're always going to hear this situation right there. Okay, so those are our enharmonic spellings of the same note, and that happens here and there. So in the case of C Lydian, which is what we were talking about, this tritone note, which I was joking is the devil's interval, because that's what they called it during the classical times, the forbidden interval. It's the 4th in the case of this C major 7 scale. Sometimes it's a flat 5. sometimes it's a sharp 4, and they sound the same. So don't let the numbers and the names there get confusing or trip you up, because there's a simpler set of things going on. What's really happening here is the tension that this creates is strong. And wants to resolve somewhere. Tension wants to resolve, and so when you get these, you find these very tense interval relationships like the tritone, you've got some kind of powerful mechanism there for going somewhere else. That's a good in-between chord, or somewhere to land before you resolve somewhere else. But that's built right into the C Lydian scale. And in this context, it doesn't sound as metal, it doesn't sound like Black Sabbath or something like, or whatever. It sounds more like, some scene from Harry Potter or something. So it's that note that's doing it. Yeah, it's got the Simpsons theme in there for sure. And so those are great tricks for knowing it without having a reference like a keyboard or anything. You can conjure up the tritone interval in your head, because if you could hum the Simpsons theme, then you can definitely find that, tritone relationship. And the trick here is to hear this stuff and to not be stuck in some kind of rule book of like, when I go from a 2 minor, I have to go to the D7. It's way more about hearing the interval, hearing the difference. And so when you're composing, writing music, in your mind's ear what kind of third sounds good in the context of this piece. You can make your own chords. Yeah, I like your comment about it sounds like a Hallmark movie. Yeah, because that's the first chord that I think, like if you're doing TV soundtrack stuff, that's just in your bag of tricks. Oh, you need kind of in-between mystery moment here. Okay, some Lydian. Is that what you're looking for? Okay, cool. I'll give you a little. And that it's down to that kind of. It's that direct of an effect, but it's that tritone that's doing it. And I'm kind of intrigued because it has a different role in other scales where it sounds more like sinister, and then there's other times it doesn't sound necessarily spooky. It's more open, and it's how it relates to this note here that creates a new kind of openness on top of this. But it's really fun to experiment with, and the best way to really understand it is to sit at a piano and play this. And you can start by playing the white keys over F. But once you understand that what that means is this, it's the same scale formula as, so it's a major scale with a sharp 4. While we're talking about, enharmonic names for the same note, here's some cool stuff to think about. And this was a revelation for me, even though it's kind of a simple thing. I didn't see this at first. And I didn't see this at first, which I mean for like 10 years of being a musician or more, is because I was learning through the guitar. And the guitar, if any of you guitar players perhaps, I love playing guitar, but it's like a strange layout for a beginner to learn music theory. That's why I think a piano keyboard is a great place to do your, study for music theory. And the guitar, because there are multiple places to play the same note, you can play a G on one string and a G on the other string, and they supposedly sound the same. There's this matrix to memorize, and that got in the way between me and understanding major third, minor third. Oh, that's the third thing, and it's everywhere, and everything has a third, above it. And that kind of stuff wasn't going in my head. I was memorizing chord shapes, and so I knew a C chord and I knew a G chord, but I didn't really see the landscape. So keyboard is great. And one thing that popped out, and maybe a class I was taking, is that you've got these intervals. Okay, here's what we'll call a second. Here's a third. Here's a fourth. Here's a fifth. This would be a sixth. So you get all that, right? But a sixth, if you take your root here up an octave, is, an inverted third. They're the same notes. So a sixth is C, A, and a third is A to C. That's a third. And when you know that sixths and thirds are the same, that kind of chops down on how many interval relationships you're ultimately dealing with, because two of them there are inverted. And so then the teacher went on further to point out that that's just all of this stuff works like that. So fourths. So this is a C in the bass, and then a fourth above it would be an F. Well, if I put the C on top, it's a fifth apart. So fourths and fifths are the same. They're inverted versions of each other. Okay, so thirds and sixths, fourths and fifths. What about seconds and sevenths? Yeah, seconds and sevenths are, if you invert this, kind of break the rule a little bit because of what type of second it is. You might have to sharpen or flatten to get those to do the same thing. But the relationships is the same. Right, I see what you're saying. The major sixth and a minor third technically. But it plays the role of the third in the scale from where you are. So that is still the third, be it a minor or major third. Like here's a scale with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I alter the third and alter the sixth, oops, excuse me, I didn't mean to play the A, and alter the seventh, there's still, their role is, that's still a seventh, talking about scales or whatever, but it's the flat seventh in this case. So it's part of a minor thing or a dominant thing. But that's a handy concept to understand, that thirds and sixths are related. Let's call it related, and fourths and fifths. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Skylar just put in that they'll always add up to 9. So you can figure it out. If you've got a fifth, what's its partner there? It's a fourth, because it will add up to 9. So there's a bunch of ways to remember that. but it's a handy concept. So you can kind of interchange. Thirds and sixths in a really kind of pretty way. They play sixths sound really nice as a melody note. And it's part of, there's a type of chord called a suspended chord. And the basic suspended chord is taking the third and turning it into a fourth instead. Very common. In fact, like every folk song in the world does, on the guitar. The sus chord. That's the sus4. If you get rid of the 3, you can do a sus2 chord, which is kind of ambiguous because there's no third. Steely Dan called this the mu chord. This was like used a lot in Steely Dan tunes because of the fact that there's no third in there, and it could be minor and it could be major, and it's kind of really open. That's a suspended 2, and the sixth is kind of related. That continues that sound up the thing, and then of course there's this sound. That is C to C sus4 6, and that sounds hopeful. It's got and it's a good little. It's kind of like a typical thing in songs to do that, to set a new home base even. Let's say I'm playing in like so that's kind of a suspended thing. Something I was thinking about earlier, though, is if we're talking about the scales going up and numbering them. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I mentioned yesterday, like in jazz harmony, we start talking about ninths, 11ths, 13ths. Those are called tensions, and you can put them on a big old, C major 7 with all the frills here. Some of the tensions don't sound just right, and so there's hipper tensions to put on specific chords. Sharp 11, which is our tritone again, sharp 4, but you pop a sharp 11 on that major 7 and it sounds hipper. I see your question about how many keys you should get on a MIDI keyboard for a minimum. For learning something like this, 3 or 4 octaves is handy. Having a really big keyboard isn't necessary because they all have like an octave up and an octave down for if you're actually kind of performing it. But if you get one that's too small, then it's hard to do these stretched out chords and hear what's going on. You can't hold down a deep enough bass note to play a high, you don't have the range. So I am a keyboard fool. I love keyboards. So I have a 88 key controller as my main thing, like straight across my desk in front of me, that feels like kind of like a piano, and I like that. And then I have some smaller things. a bass station that's only 2 octaves. And that's limiting. You definitely have to play with the up and down with that, but it's handy for taking to the gig. So those are my kind of thoughts on how big of a keyboard you might want to get. So when we're talking about 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, it's kind of like the sus chord a little bit shares some of the same notes, but it's up an octave, and it's got some similar sounds to it. One of my favorite kind of combination chords, a lot of ways to look at this, is one chord over a bass note. You'll see that written in songbooks. But a sound I really like is, I'm still thinking in the key of C, but I'm going to play G as my root. That would be like the 5th, a 5 chord. And typically I might play a G triad over that chord. And in this context, that chord wants to resolve to C, okay? But this is kind of hip. If I play an F major triad over G, it sounds like this. And really gospel-y sounding. Like in the context of maybe a little chord progression, let me put it in there where it really will drive it home. You start with the C. I'm going to go up to the 3rd. I made it dominant, or I made it major, excuse me. It's a little something extra with that F major 7 over G. But really what that would maybe be is, here's the G, and then we'd be talking about like 9, 11, 13 on top of that. Or excuse me, 9, 11, 13. Is that right? No. It's 7, 9, 11. So you can think of it as those jazz tensions, but I think it's easier just to see it as G in the bass and an F major chord on top. And you can move that formula around and get that sound again. Here, let's see. So we get it again with the C over D. It kind of feels like a suspended type of a feeling. You know, it's in that Snoopy, jazzy, stuff. And it's a nice thing. It reminds me really like old school gospel R&B type. Yeah, you think it would be just F over G? Yeah. Because then you'll actually get just those notes, and that is what it is. But it's interesting to know, like, what are these notes in that scale that make it sound like that? And if we think of them in G, like what would we play over this? in terms of melody or something like that, then I see the flat 7, 9, or 2, 4, notes in those scales. Another place to find some of that kind of tension and release within this same scale structure is what my teacher called neighbor tones. So every scale tone has what's called a neighbor tone. Hey, see ya, Skylar. Thanks for stopping by. And the neighbor tones would be sharp or flat, 1/2 step from the scale tone. And they can be used in fun little ways. It's called chromaticism. They're called chromatic notes. That's the chromatic scale, every note in a row. So you can put chromatic or neighbor tone or approach notes. There's got a lot of nicknames. And that was really still C major stuff, whereas where I was starting to thinking about that. But in that case, that was using a bunch of chromaticism, neighbor tones, and flattening specifically the 7th to get that dominant 7th sound is a very bluesy sound. So that's just one note from the C major scale. Instead of that one, we play that one. Major 3rd, flat 7. I'm taking it and adding a 9th up there, or another 3rd, or I can't really reach any further. Flat 7 on the F. And then there was that F over G at the end instead of just playing a G. So I'm gonna kind of keep it a little bit shorter today. I'm gonna wrap up pretty soon. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat. I know I've been a little bit meandering today, but what I wanted to talk about was how altering one note in the scale or two really changes the game here. And you're still thinking of it as C, diatonic C stuff here, because you can see what it is you've altered. So if it's this note that's making things sound interesting, then I can quickly see that, oh, yeah, that's the sharp 4 or flat 5, sharp 4 or flat 5 of C. And you start to build kind of a map in your ear where that's a sound you're very familiar with. So yeah, and in the case of the blues we were just playing, the main notes are C major scale with a flat 7, and then I'm able to sneak in there flat 3, flat 5, and a natural 5 or a natural 3. So and you can use that in interesting ways, which might sound really familiar. So that's C dominant 7, and that is just characterized by having a flat 7. So if you think of it that way, it makes it a simpler way to play around with it, to make music out of a scale or an idea. Flat 6, we talked about that yesterday. That changes things around. That's different than just your basic, kind of basic stuff. That is something to experiment with. So basically, there's, you can break any of these rules from the C major diatonic scale. You can create a scale of your own. Like how about we're gonna go. Well, I mean, they're all, every scale has been done, so I'm not gonna invent a scale, but I'm just gonna make up one using just flat 3, flat 6, major 7. So that's an actual scale, but harmonic minor is what it's called. That's got a mysterious sound to it. So that is a C major scale, but we've taken the 3rd and the 6th and brought them down a half step, flattened them. And that major 7 gives it that exotic sound. And then just like we've been doing with each one of these ideas, you can make chords based on that scale, up the scale. So in C harmonic minor, which is flat 3, flat 6, you'd get these shapes. Or actually it's this. And then And that's a pure dominant 7 chord. So in the harmonic minor scale of C, there's a completely completely diminished chord on the 7th degree, and that really wants to resolve. So making chords out of scales opens up a lot of doors, and take these ideas and just improvise with them, and you'll deepen the way you're hearing it. And I'm going to wrap up on that harmonic minor scale is a very cool scale to learn, and to learn what's unique about it by ear, kind of can tell what notes don't fit as well, but it makes for some really cool chords. Kind of a spooky place to end, but that's where we're going to wrap up today. I'll hang out for a second. If there's any questions that pop up, I'll gladly answer them. And thanks for hanging. I'm going to make a much more formalized version of this lesson in a future YouTube video, but I wanted to try just kind of hacking through it to see what things came up and what to work on. And hopefully you enjoyed that and learned something. And thanks for hanging out. Really appreciate it.